Typically, we tend to think of following Jesus as leaving behind the familiar to go to the unfamiliar. Like someone who might go overseas to be a missionary. They leave everything behind. We often might think of loyalty to Jesus like we looked at last week. Jesus calling 3 individuals to go and follow him, to pick up everything and go into the unknown. However, the more difficult task can be the call to go back home. Sometimes loyalty demands us to share the gospel right where we're at in everyday life. There's a story in the Bible about a man. You see, for the first time in this man's life, he was in full control of his mind. He could think. There was no rage, there was no fear, there was no torment in this man's life. No more cutting his arms and his legs with sharp stones. As he roamed burial caves. Can you imagine with me for a moment living amongst the stench of rotting flesh day in and day out? This man roamed the burial caves where there were corpses. However, this day is different. There's no more wandering amongst the hills and the caves. No more trying to figure out where he's going to lay his head. No more yelling in anger at the night sky because of the pain he was in. Where this man lived, it was surrounded by several towns and villages, and people feared this man. No one wanted to go by this man, especially in one of his demonic rages. The local townsmen lived in fear. Some people were brave enough to try to chain this man up, to try to keep him away from everybody. But he broke the chains every time. You see, for this day was different. This was a new day in this man's life. This was the day this man met another man named Jesus. Jesus came across the shore off the Sea of Galilee and was met by this maniac. He saw Jesus coming on a boat, and the moment Jesus' feet hit the sand, this man began to run towards him. Not just run, but he began to sprint right towards Jesus. And when he got to him, he bowed before him. In fact, it was the demons who lived inside this man who recognized Jesus first. And they yelled, "Son of God." I'm not sure what they saw. You know what? He'd been tormented most of his life, but this was actually worse than anything he'd ever encountered. Encountering Jesus face to face with these demons. He thought he'd been living in hell already, but now he was facing the living God in the person of Jesus Christ face to face. Who was this man who got out of the boat? He looked like most other Jewish men did, but what was so special about him? The tomb man, the burial cave man, had beaten off a lot larger men than this man Jesus, but yet this man was now bowed at Jesus' feet. At that moment, Jesus told the demons to leave. You know, this man now, with the demons gone, had never experienced anything in his life like this before. He'd never felt the safety, he'd never felt the peace of being simply near this man named Jesus. He had only known Jesus for a couple hours, and he was actually determined to follow Jesus for the rest of his life. He was determined to be Jesus' disciple his whole life. As he's hanging out with Jesus with these demons gone, they're hanging out by the seashore, and all of a sudden, pigs begin to float up on the sea. Begin to float on the shore. Like, this is a crazy story. Well, you see, when Jesus cast out the demons, he sent the demons into a herd of pigs, and the pigs ran into the sea, and they all drowned. As these men, these two new friends, are talking, Jesus and this man, they begin to hear people talking in the distance, and over the hill came the herdsmen of the ones who were with the pigs. You see, they saw this whole thing happen. When they saw Jesus coming across the water, they're like, what's this guy doing? But all of a sudden, the maniac who they'd known all along that we're going to keep our pigs over here, we're going to keep our herd over here, we're going to keep our herd away from this man, probably might even eat the pigs, right? We saw him sprint. But all of a sudden, then we saw our pigs sprint into the water. And they came to get this Jesus. Because you know what? Jesus was actually now worse than this man. Some of these people began to go look at these pigs in awe of them washing up on shore, and some of the pigs floating out to the sea. They're like, what witchcraft does this man Jesus have? We've known this demoniac our whole life, but now here is this one Jesus who cast them out. You could hear alarm in their voices. The group began to rub their eyes and blink in confusion when they saw the man. For most of their life, this man was crazy, absolutely out of his mind. However, in this moment, as they look at this man and they look at Jesus, look at the man, look at Jesus, again, it's Jesus that they're afraid of. These people actually beg Jesus to leave. Get out of here. We don't want anybody like you around us. We don't want any more trouble. We don't want any more of our animals to die. However, this man, this was the most amazing person he'd ever met in his entire life, and he doesn't want Jesus to go anywhere. So as Jesus begins to go back in the boat to leave, as one foot steps in, this man says, take me with you. Take me with you. I want to follow you wherever you go. As Jesus begins to get in the boat and the boat starts to push off, the man begs even more, take me with you. I want to leave this life behind, and I want to start it new with you, Jesus. This story is from Mark chapter 5, 1 through 20. We're going to look at two verses, though, of how Jesus responds to this man. This man set free from his demonic rages, set free from a life of cutting himself and hollowing at the night sky, wants to go be with Jesus. I want to follow you, Jesus. Just like we saw last week, people volunteered to follow Jesus, and he's like, Jesus, take me with you. Take me with you. This is how Jesus responds to the man as he begins to take off in the boat. He says, no, go home to your family and tell them everything the Lord has done for you and how merciful he has been. So the man started off to visit the 10 towns in the region and began to proclaim the great things Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed at what he told them. You see, again, we tend to think of following Jesus as leaving behind the familiar to go to the unfamiliar. We tend to think of Jesus as picking everything up, leaving it behind, and following him into the unknown. However, many times the more difficult call in our life is to go back home. It's to be planted right where we're at in life and to be loyal to Jesus in everyday life. You see, to me, this passage is absolutely fascinating. Most of the Gospels, we see Jesus saying, come follow me. We see another similar experience with a boat in the first call of the disciples in Luke chapter 5, where Jesus calls Peter, come, leave everything behind and come follow me. And it says that they dropped their nets, left their boats on the shore, and they followed Jesus. We often think about Jesus that way. But in this context, it's absolutely amazing. Jesus says, no, my will for you is not to come with me. My will for you is to go back home to your family and tell them everything I've done for you. This term family also translates as friends and social circle. The people who think you're absolutely insane, go back home and tell them your transformation experience. Go back home and tell them that you've met this man named Jesus and he's changed your life. And oftentimes, if I think about it, it's oftentimes a lot harder to do that in everyday life than it is to go off to some foreign land where I don't know someone or someone's brand new. And so this passage is really fascinating. That Jesus sends this man off really is one of the first missionaries we see in the Bible, in the New Testament. He sends this man to a new place. And in this sense, this man needs to be loyal or obedient to the call Jesus has for him. You want to know more than that? As we look at these two verses, it's more than just the awe of this story. There's actually a practical training tool in this for all of us to see how we can be loyal in everyday life. So we're going to look at some practicality, but we're also going to see how we can be loyal in everyday life. The first thing about this is place. He says, go home to your family. Jesus all calls us to a place. Again, we often think about it as, come follow me, leaving the place you once were behind. In this case, Jesus tells them the place. Go home to your family. This idea of the word go is a present imperative, which means it's a command that says, as you're going about life, tell your family about me. It's like the Great Commission. The Great Commission, oftentimes we think, I need to go across the world. That means, in everyday life, you make disciples. Here he's saying, in everyday life, tell people what I've done for you. Tell them your transformation story. We see here, if we go back to these verses, does this man argue his call? Not that we know of. All we know is that Mark's like, nope, so this man started off to visit like, hey, he was making haste in everyday life to go to his family and friends to tell them what happened. You want to know, here's the other interesting part about this to me. So when I read the Bible, I typically ask myself a lot of questions. So I'm like, why would Jesus send this guy to this region called the 10 towns? Which you can go home and Google and you can kind of see the locations and stuff like that. At this point in Jesus' ministry, Jesus had never gone to this region of the 10 towns. But when you turn either your tablet or turn your Bible to Mark 7, you see Jesus goes to these 10 towns and then he heals a man who's deaf. So then I turn my page one more and I go to Mark chapter 8 and it's the feeding of the 4,000. So I begin to ask myself, where was the feeding of the 4,000? Doesn't really necessarily say in there, but as Bible scholars do their work, when I Google that and I look it up and I research that stuff, it says that the feeding of the 4,000 were in the regions on the shore of the 10 towns. This man, his mission to go to his family was ultimately for him to prepare their hearts for Jesus to come. Isn't that amazing? To me, that absolutely blows my mind that Jesus had a purpose for this man to go home to his family, and that's what it looked like to follow Jesus in his days. That's what it looked like. So we talk about this idea of being loyal. Are you loyal to the place Jesus has called you to go? Are you being loyal in your everyday life? Oftentimes we think, I got to leave this behind and put it here. This is a great reminder this morning that we need to be loyal to the call God has given us in everyday life. I don't know where your go is. Maybe your go is the workplace. Maybe your go is your neighborhood. Maybe your go is in this station of life God has called you to live here. But are you loyal to that? Oftentimes, I find myself like I wish I was somewhere else in life, right? Or I'm thinking like, how am I going to escape this aspect? I wish this would come. Jesus saying, no, go home to your family. Go in everyday life where God has called you to be loyal to him. But what do we do when we're loyal to him? Well, he tells the man something specifically. He says this, proclaim now. Tell them everything the Lord has done for you. So the first thing is the place God's called you. But now in that place, he's called you to proclaim the gospel. But check this out. He says this, tell them everything the Lord has done for you. So oftentimes we think we have to tell people this thing that's kind of way out there, like no one can attain it type thing. No, he says, tell people what God has done for you. What's he done in your life? How is he working in your life? And then he says this, not only that, but here's what you need to include when you tell people what he's done for you. How merciful he's been in your life. That's a practical training tool of how we are loyal and where God has called us to be, is to tell people what God has done for us, or Jesus has done for us, and then check this out, include this, how merciful he's been. Vance Havner says this: the gospel is not a secret to be hoarded, but a story to be heralded. You know, oftentimes when I relate with people, I'm always looking for that prime opportunity to share a little bit about Jesus, or, wait for, the right thing. But he's saying, no, in everyday life, look for these opportunities to tell people what God has done for you and how merciful he's been. The gospel is not a secret to be hoarded. Rather, it's a story to be heralded. When Jesus says to proclaim everything that I've done for you, or the Lord has done for you, he was speaking in this way. The word proclaim or herald the message was used in the context of an official whose duty was to go to a place on behalf of a king and loudly and extensively proclaim what the king wanted for that town. They would enter a town on behalf of the emperor and make a public proclamation of a message to be given to that place. Now that ties in the place. It ties in the feeding of the 4,000. It ties in Mark chapter 7 where Jesus heals a deaf man. That man was acting as a herald for Jesus to come. A modern missionary preparing seeds in people's heart for them to really encounter Jesus in everyday life. And that's what we're called to do as well. Some years ago, an eye doctor, fresh out of college, opened his own business. Had no friends, had no money, had no people coming to it. Became discouraged. He's like, what do I do? Do I need to start getting a better marketing strategy? Or maybe everybody in this town can see perfectly. I don't know. Until one day, a blind man came in. Looking into his eyes, he said, let's restore your sight. So they went in and he did an operation, and it proved to be successful. The man said, I honestly have no money to pay you for this. I can't pay you. The doctor said, yeah, you can. Tell everybody you see that can't see about what I did. Would you know, 2 weeks later, this man showed up with like 20 people in tow because they saw the transformation in his eyes. And they wanted that to happen as well. And this is what we're called to be as people who've been transformed by the gospel, is to live everyday lives right where we're planted and tell other people what God has done for us. Now that really challenges us in a lot of ways, because now it challenges me to really think about, how has Jesus changed me? How has Jesus transformed me? How is God working in my everyday life? And so we see here that the man started off to visit, in verse 20, to visit the 10 towns of the region and began to proclaim the great things Jesus had done for him. So how do we proclaim this? So again, I want to give us a little bit practical training tools to think about how we do this proclamation piece. So here we go. The first thing we need to do is we need to tell and live our testimony, or tell and live your testimony. Tell people what are the great things that God has done for you. That is the greatest thing. Oftentimes, we might say, oh, well, the gospel is this, or my church is this. Begin with, how has your life been transformed? Who's going to sit there and argue with you and say, that didn't happen to you? Well, maybe they will, but you're saying it's your story. It's your story. So tell people your story. And here's another practical tip. If you don't have some of that written down or ready to go on your mind, think about those things. The second thing is about living our personal testimony. I came across this week. I just thought it was fascinating, that how we live our lives ultimately is a way to proclaim. And so the person had three things that he thought were really important to this. Number one were our attitudes. Do people see your life as a joyful life? Or do you have a bad attitude in the workplace? Are you complaining all the time or causing issues and different things like that? What's your attitude like? Do people see your attitude and be like, where'd you get that attitude from? Because I want an attitude like that. They'd be like, I got it from Jesus. He's changing my attitude. The other one is our words. Do you encourage people and build them up, or do you tear them down? Maybe you use foul language in the workplace when you're around certain people. Then when you're around other people, you clean it up to make it look good. Or do people say, why do you talk like that? I've never heard you use bad language. Why do you talk like that? I've never heard you talk bad about a boss before. Why don't you talk bad about the boss with us? I'm different. I'm changed. The last one is our behavior. Do people see you self-centered, or do they see you giving your life away? Do people see you living with the same goals and values that you proclaim to have on a Sunday morning in your everyday living? Or do you blend the world and they just kind of are together? So we need to tell and live our testimony. We can tell it by telling about what God has done for us, how He's transformed your life. But we also can do it through things like our attitudes or our words or how we live our everyday lives and our behavior. We do need to get to a point where we do explain the gospel. Who God is, who Jesus is, what He's done for us. That the God of the universe created this world. He's created people to be in relationship with Him. But people broke that relationship by rebelling from God, and sin enters the world, and He sends a rescuer, Jesus, to rescue us. And that all of us are in need of a sinner, and nobody's good enough to get to heaven. Ultimately, we have to tell people what Jesus has done for them. What Jesus has done for them. By dying on the cross, resurrecting from the grave, defeating sin and death, ultimately waiting for Him to come back. But in that story, as Jesus tells this man, we must emphasize mercy. And here's what it is. Here's what we're looking at. That in a lot of religions, it's about what I can do, or it's about working hard to be in God's presence. But in Christianity, it's never about that, because we are not good enough, we can't work hard enough. God doesn't accept us based off of how hard we work. But here's the amazing thing. He accepts us based off of what somebody else has done, what Jesus has done. In this picture, mercy ultimately is a gift of not getting what I deserve. Ultimately, it's a picture in this translation to experience compassion. And Jesus has compassion on this man. You want to know something else that's absolutely fascinating? In the Old Testament, the word mercy is defined of God as steadfast loyalty. That God never gives up on you. And that's an amazing picture of mercy. No matter how far I run, no matter how far I flee from God, the story I can proclaim to other people is that God never gave up on me. God never gave up on this demoniac, no matter how hard he cut his arm with stones, no matter how much he howled at the moon, no matter how much he broke chains, no matter how many rotting corpses he slept by. God had not forgotten the demoniac, and Jesus shows up one day and gives this man something he does not deserve in his life. A chance of salvation, a chance of transformation, and ultimately they say, mercy is based on forgiveness, love, reconciliation, and truth. Tell people when you share the gospel that how merciful God is. That God, it's not this transaction of I just said a prayer or I just did this, but it's that God in His mercy is loyal to us. He's loyal to us. He never gives up on us, regardless of what we've done, and that is immense mercy. No matter if we have 10,000 demons living in us before we come to Christ, or even now if you've walked away, He wants your life. And He wants you to be loyal back to Him. So we need to be loyal to the place God's called us. We need to be loyal to how we proclaim the gospel. If you say, I'm a follower of Christ, sharing the gospel is not optional. It's not optional. You don't get a choice if you get to do that or not. Sometimes that goes against our comfort zone. Sometimes it goes against what we want or how we want to live. I'm not saying you need to be the next Billy Graham. But what I am saying is, wherever God has placed you, He's called you to be faithful to share the gospel. If you want to go deeper on what this looks like in your life, we can meet at my office at Espresso's. I'll buy you coffee. We can talk through this a little more. But here's the cool thing. Everyone was amazed at what He told them. There's a performance piece to this. And it's like this. When we are loyal to the place God calls us, and we're loyal to proclaim the gospel, God produces amazing results. God produces amazing results if we are loyal to the first two. We're loyal to the place he's called us to go. We're loyal to proclaim the gospel. God produces amazing results in our lives. This man was a poster child for 2 Corinthians 5:17. If anybody is in Christ, he's a new creation. The old things have passed away, and the new has come. The new has come. So if we're loyal to the first two, God always shows up. God always shows up. I can even think of recently, I've had more conversations in the last 2 weeks with people that came either to the job fair this past Thursday. Check out On Mission Together, a little promo. Check out some highlights on Mission Together tomorrow. Job seekers, employers, and then people I knew in the community that said this question: why would a church ever do something like this? And then you tell them why, and they're like, wow, I never seen anything like that. It's literally words out of people's mouth. So again, those aren't our results, those are God's results. When we are loyal to a place, we are loyal to proclaim, God produces results in people's lives. In this case, people were absolutely amazed at what they saw. They were amazed. It's incredible to think about. How can you be loyal to living this out in your everyday life? Because oftentimes with this story, we never get past, these pigs ran into the sea, and this man's cutting himself in burial tombs, and we talk about all these things. Jesus talks to the demons and calls them out by name. All right, great. You want to know something that's fascinating? This man went back to where he was from, told everybody he knew about everything God had done for him in that moment. And to me, that's the most amazing thing of the story. Because when Jesus shows up and he transforms someone's life, and this man now is called to go back to everyday life where he was from, to all his schoolmates to say, there comes the crazy man. And people are like amazed at what they see. They're amazed at the transformation they see in this man's life. That's the most amazing part of the story. And oftentimes we think about being loyal to Jesus as like, I got to go start this new thing, or I got to go pick up and do this thing. God's maybe calling me to go do this. And maybe he is. I'm not saying he's not. But what the most amazing thing can be is being loyal to the place God's called you to go in everyday life. In that place, being loyal to proclaim everything he's done for you, including how merciful he's been. And you will see amazing results. Be loyal to the place. Be loyal to proclaim. And you will see a performance that God does as we watch him work out in our lives. And so I'm asking us and I'm challenging us this week that you would look at the place you've been called to go. Are you being loyal to that? Saying, I'm here, God. I'm fully planted. I'm fully in. Or maybe you're just kind of sitting here waiting. I'm going to wait till it all passes by. In that place, are you loyal to proclaim what everything he's done for you, including how merciful he's been? And then trust God that he will show up with some type of results in everybody's life because I've done the first two. Oftentimes we think about it as last week. Jesus challenges us to leave the known to go into the unknown. But sometimes the hardest thing to do in changing our loyalties is being sold out to being loyal to Jesus in everyday life. Go home to your family and tell them everything I've done. Proclaim to them everything I've done for you, including how merciful I've been. And then we too can share stories of how people are amazed about the transformation taking place